Reese, here's one more person just came. Okay. All right. So, Reese says we're recording. So hello out there in the recording world. This is the listing paperwork class. And in order to get going on this, I'm going to share my screen. Oh, before I do that though, can I ask one of you to maybe be my co-host? Because Reese, are you staying on the call or not? Yes, you're staying on? Oh, okay. So Reese will be my co-host. Okay, great. All right, thank you. I just don't want to share my screen and then people are trying to get in. Okay, so I never know what screen I'm supposed to be choosing, but apparently it's this one. All right, so we're going to dot loop and we're going to go to the home page and we're going to add a loop. And so we're going to choose a property address and let's choose 23 Wyckoff Avenue in Wyckoff, New Jersey. Okay, and then we're going to hit continue. And then we're going to select the type of loop. So this is a residential listing loop. And we're going to hit continue. If we have a photo, you can upload it. Since I'm making this up as I go along, I don't. So we're just going to say done. And it's creating our loop for us.
Sally, can we add the photo after the fact?
Yes, you can if you want.
Okay.
But really, the two of us are going to be the only people who see the photo.
Oh, got it.
So it's not like, you know, obviously you want to put it in the MLS, but it's not critical. But, you know, if you like to do that, that's great. Okay, so now we're going to view the loop. And what you'll see is it's put our paperwork into the loop so that we know what we need to be using. And notice at the top of the page, there's something called a listing documents checklist. And you're going to see the forms that you need to have. So once you finish doing your forms, you're going to probably come back in here and say, okay, do I have the COVID waiver? Do I have the consumer information statement, dual agency, lead paint form signed, if it applies, and did I give them the lead paint booklet? Did I have them do the seller disclosure? Do we have permission to advertise? Is the listing agreement signed by the owner, you, and eventually by me? If there's a referral involved, you want to have the referral in here. And commission letter request we don't need yet, but if it's an exclusive, we're not really going to talk about that today, but if it is an exclusive listing, meaning that it's not going to be in the regular form on the MLS, you would need exclusive paperwork. So the other things all come later. But for now, let's go back to our loop. And we'll just kind of go document by document, and I'll show you what you're going to be doing. The first document is the COVID waiver, and you'll notice there's two versions of it. The first one is for your everyday seller or buyer. And the second one is for a case where maybe the property that you're listing is being listed by an executor of the estate, or someone who has power of attorney for the person. Maybe it's an older person and they have like sort of a guardian or someone who has power of attorney. Then you would use this second one, but almost all the time you're going to use this first one. And it's super important, especially right now, because of, you know, COVID is back on the rise again. So we need to protect ourselves, not only from COVID, but from lawsuits by having this COVID waiver signed. So I'm not going to go and add all the buyers' names or anything, but when you start the loop, maybe I'll just go back for a second. And when you have your loop, down here at the bottom, it has people, right? So you can add people, and the people you're adding in the beginning, I am admin for Keller Williams. That's the broker name on this. So I'm already in here. I'm not sure how this person got in here, but maybe this was somebody's listing at some point that they must have sold. And that's why when I use that address, this name is coming up. But you would add the name of the buyer, the name of the seller and their email. And as somebody pointed out, it's important that they each have their own email. So you would add each person and each email into here. And then eventually you will be adding the realtor who sells it. You might be adding the attorneys. And by adding these people, it facilitates people signing, and it facilitates your being able to send stuff to people easily. But for now, we're just going to go back to the top and look at the COVID waiver briefly. So the COVID waiver is easy. It's a fill in the blanks. So you're going to fill in whatever date it is and the address of the property. And basically, you should read this. You should read every one of these documents. But in a nutshell, what this says is everybody knows that there's COVID. We all acknowledge the existence of it. But by signing this, they're representing that neither they nor any member of their immediate household has tested positive or shown signs of COVID within the past 14 days.
Patty, you do this on the show date, right?
Well, you do an initial one when you're taking the listing, because
Okay.
you're actually going to attach it to the listing in the MLS.
Oh, okay.
Okay, you're going to attach it to the listing in MLS because as the listing agent, you are going to ask every buyer agent who wants to show the property to have the buyer sign the COVID waiver. You need it signed by both parties, right?
Got
Both
it.
parties need to acknowledge that they don't have COVID, nor does anybody in their immediate family.
Not to go off track, but for rental listing,
Same thing.
COVID and consumer information statement?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
You would
The
attach it to the listing.
consumer information statement is for buyers, sellers, renters, landlords.
Got it.
COVID
Okay.
waiver, same thing. Same thing. Everybody does.
And you would put a date on it or not?
I would.
Okay.
Yeah, because this is the initial one, remember, that you're going to
Got
put on the MLS for the listing.
Got it.
Subsequent ones would be dated whatever date.
You would just make a copy?
Yeah. Well, the idea of putting it on the MLS and attaching it to the listing is that the other agent will just download it, and they're good for like 14 days. So it's not like you have to do one every single time.
Got it.
Yeah. Okay, so now we get to the actual listing agreement. We're gonna, autofill the roles, because remember, if we'd filled in the people's names at the bottom, we can automatically fill them in. But for now, we're just gonna look at the form. Because this was a listing, the information is coming up as already filled in to an extent. And it makes it easy for me to show you. Each county in the MLS has a number assigned to it. So 02 happens to be the number for Bergen County. So anytime you list something in Bergen County, it's always going to say 02 here. And then the next code that you have to fill in is the town. And if you're unsure of what the town code is, you can get that from the MLS. You can just go into the MLS and it'll show you what the code is for that town. When you're doing a listing, you would be well served to pull up a copy of their tax record, which again, you can get from the MLS. You can do a search for it. You can do what's called a tax search. That's one of the categories under search in the MLS. And you're going to pull up their tax record. And you are then going to copy exactly what it's saying. You see how this says 000.01. Always put it exactly. Don't just put 01, put 000.01. Sometimes there's a suffix, which might be like another 0.002 or something like that. This one doesn't have a suffix, so there's nothing there. And then you're going to put the lot number, which again comes from the tax records. Now we're going to put the street number. If the street is North Street, South Street, West, East, we're going to put that in here. Otherwise, we can leave it blank. And then we're going to put the name of the street. And notice that after it, there's something called mode. Mode means, is it a street, an avenue, a drive, a place, whatever. You're going to fill that in here. Then you're going to put the price of the house and the zip code. Here you're going to put the owner's name. Oh, sorry, let me backtrack a minute. Next thing is directions. Whenever you're giving directions to your listing, the idea is that you want to make it easy for the other agent and the buyers to find your listing. So the best way to do that is if it's on a main street, for example, if it's on Godwin Avenue, or I think we said Wyckoff Avenue, which is another big, long street. It's always a good idea to say it's between, Broad and Maple. Give people two streets that kind of bookend the section of this very long street so that people have an idea where to go to find the house. I realize most people have a GPS at this point in time, but still not everybody does. So it's just a good idea. It's a good practice. One of my pet peeves is when a realtor, I would say a lazy realtor, for the directions writes GPS. I just don't go for that. I think it's unprofessional. I think you need to tell people the actual directions. And it's always a good idea if the house is a little off the beaten track to try to start the directions with a main street so that they, most people would know, so that they have a good starting point. And then the next field is the listing date, which you can get just by clicking on the calendar. It'll always default to the actual date that it is that day, but you can choose, let's say you're doing it today, but you're really not going to put it into the MLS until tomorrow. You can click that. And another thing I should add, which this just reminded me, when once you have dated the listing and the sellers have signed, it needs to go into the MLS within 24 hours. So if we were to date this listing today, by tomorrow at this time, it would need to be in the MLS, just so you know. Expiration.
Hey, Sally,
yes.
any of the entries that you're making here, can that automatically flow into the MLS, or do you have to make just a whole new set of entries?
You're going to have to do a new set of entries. However, there is another way to do this. And the other way to do it is you can do this in New Jersey MLS and then upload it into .loop. And if you do it in New Jersey MLS, a lot of it will auto-populate into the listing there. So you might want to consider that. And also MLS has a function where if you're filling in all the information for a listing, but let's say you're doing it today, but the listing doesn't take effect until tomorrow or the next day, there's a function in there where you can save a listing for later and then go in on the date that it's supposed to be listed and put it in.
Sally, a question for you. Up on top, you had the county, the burg, and the town. And
Yes.
the numbers. I didn't do numbers. I did actual, county Bergen and town Garfield. Is that okay, or do I need to correct that?
Well, you can certainly do that on what your people are signing, because they're not going to understand what these numbers are necessarily.
Okay,
But the MLS, when you're inputting it into the MLS, will require these codes.
got it. Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if you hand wrote in the name of the town or the name of the county. That's okay. It's
Okay,
just when you're inputting it, you'll have to use the codes.
got it.
Yeah. Okay. And so now we've put in our listing date. Now our expiration date, our policy is that we take a 6-month listing. Sometimes you're going to talk to people and they're going to say, 6 months, I don't want to do that. First of all, you should tell them, look, if we price your home properly, it's going to be gone probably within a month, certainly 2 months. It's not even going to be an issue. But it is our company policy to do a 6-month listing. However, if you are unhappy at any point, you can let me know. And if I can't correct what you're unhappy about, we will let you out of the listing. So a lot of people are fearful that they're going to get stuck with some terrible realtor and not be able to escape from the listing. And there are some companies that have that policy, like once you sign the listing, you're not getting out of it. I personally think, and it's the feeling of our company, that if someone is unhappy, we need to let them go. If we can't make them happy by changing something, sometimes I'll call and I'll say, like, would it help if you worked with another person? Like maybe it's just a terrible personality conflicts. We try to keep the listing at least in-house. But if we can't, our policy is to let them go, because otherwise what we've just created is a person who hates Keller Williams for doing this to them. And that's not worth it. It's not worth the bad publicity. So
Is that something we pass by you then?
yes, you would come to me if you were having a problem, or many times they will have called me
Yeah,
if they're unhappy. So, I mean, I'm pleased to say that with all the people we have in our office and the many, many, many listings we have, in the course of a year, it doesn't happen too often that I get a call from an upset homeowner. But it's inevitable, especially with the kind of numbers we do, that there'll be some disgruntled person. Often they're unreasonable. They're just frustrated, or they refuse to lower the price of their house when that's the problem, but they're trying to blame it on the realtor.
right.
Yeah. Okay. So now we come to the owner's names. And again, it's like we talked about with writing up the contract, it's their legal names. So whatever is on the deed. Exceptions. Who knows what exceptions are? Okay, I will tell you. So an exception to the listing is a situation where perhaps they were for sale by owner. And there's a couple who kept saying, yeah, we're going to buy your house. We're going to buy your house, but they haven't yet. And the owners decided, look, I need to put this on the market. They're going to ask you, can I have these people as an exception to the listing? Meaning if they buy it, I don't owe you a commission. And usually we have to go along with that. However, we tell them they can have the exception for 2 weeks only 2 weeks. Because what I don't want to happen to you is you've killed yourself for 6 months on a listing. You've spent money on it. You've sat at open houses. You've done all kinds of marketing. And in the 6th month, they say to you, oh, the exception came along. See ya. We're not going to pay you a dime. So we want to get it over with quickly. And so you tell them you have 2 weeks. They have to give you the person's name, address, and phone number so that you know it's legit, because otherwise they could just, come to you and say, oh yeah, there was this person. So they need to be able to give you their name, address, and phone number in order to do that. You'll see what's written in here. This is the code for Keller Williams Village Square in Ridgewood. It's 2402. And that's our code. I recommend to people that some of these codes and passwords and things, make a contact in your phone. You always have your phone with you, and just put, New Jersey MLS code 2402. So you always have it. You don't have to think about it. This is my salesperson code for New Jersey MLS. Each of you has a code, and you're going to fill your code in. If you're listing it with another person, you're going to put their code in here. Otherwise, you're going to leave it blank. For agency disclosure, you're always going to say yes for seller's agent and no for transaction agent, or N, Y and N. And then for the compensation. So this is an example, but our commissions can be either 5%, 6%. If you want to get 7%, go for it. But we do want you to have a minimum of 5% in most towns, and there's a few exceptions, which we can talk about another time. But typically, as you know, the commissions are divided in half, not always, but usually. And so if this were what's probably the most common commission of 5%, the buyer agent and the transaction agent would get 2.5% minus 250. We really don't have sub-agents anymore, so you're just going to put N in this spot. Okay, then you're going to add up the number of rooms, but you're not going to add every room. When you're counting rooms, bathrooms don't count, okay? It has to be a room, a regular room with windows, although they don't always have windows. I shouldn't say windows, but not bathrooms. So you might have living room, dining room, family room, kitchen, maybe a bedroom on the first floor, and then you're going to add up what's upstairs. And then there's a separate question that asks you, how many bedrooms does it have and how many bathrooms? And you'll notice in this one, there happen to be 2 half bathrooms. So next to half baths, there's a 2. For the style of the house, you're either going to put colonial, ranch, split level, or bi-level. It's usually one, or a Cape Cod. And then if there's a sub style, there isn't always, but if there is one, you should put it in. Like, for example, for colonial, it might be Center Hall colonial. You're going to get the taxes off of the tax record, or it's not a bad idea to call the town, give them the block and the lot, and say, I just want to know what the taxes are for this year. And they should be able to tell you.
So Sally, for a rental, do you need to list the style?
I don't think it's a field on a rental listing. A rental listing is a different form.
Got it.
Yeah. Off the top of my head, I don't remember, but I don't specifically recall it being on there. Okay, so we have our taxes. The next field is approximate lot dimensions. You should be able to get that from the tax record. it's not a bad idea to ask your sellers if they have a copy of their survey. And that would be a way for you to verify if the information on the tax record is correct. Approximate lot square footage, again, that should be on the tax record. And then lot frontage. So over here with dimensions, usually there's two, right? So let's say it's 100 by 150. The first number is always the frontage. So if it were 100 by 150, we would fill in 100 here. Then you're going to find out, does it have a sewer system? Meaning, is it a public sewer? Or is it a private system? Meaning it's a septic system. You're going to ask them if they have public water or if it's well water, and you're going to fill that in here. Next, we come to a description of the rooms on each level of the house. Now, I want you to notice that there's ground floor, first, second, third, and basement. So the difference between a basement and a ground floor is the basement is underground. You have to go down a flight of stairs, and there's no direct way to go outside from it. Ground floor means that the lowest level is on the same level as the property, as the grass. And you could actually walk out and be in the yard from ground floor. So make sure that you fill in basements under basements and ground floors under ground floors. And then you're going to have a simple description of the rooms. And a lot of times they're abbreviated. So I'm just going to throw some things in here. So ENT would be entry foyer. Then we would say living room. And if there's a fireplace, we're going to put a little slash and we're going to put FPL. So that would mean living room with a fireplace. And then for dining room, sometimes you just see DR, or sometimes you see FDR. And FDR is considered a formal dining room, which means it's a definite separate room. Some people have their dining room as kind of an extension of another room. And maybe you have a family room. Oops, I lost my. And maybe there's another fireplace there. So, oops. And then we're going to go upstairs and put our rooms upstairs. If there's a third floor, we'll add the rooms there. And then if the basement. And basement, what you usually say is if it's finished or unfinished. And if it's finished, and let's say there's a home theater or something fancy, you want to mention that in this space. Over here for the schools, I want to warn you about something. If it's a town that has more than one elementary school, junior high, or high school, you are not going to fill these in. And I'll tell you why. The reason is that sometimes schools redistrict, and people often look for a home based on a certain school district. Maybe they're already living in that school district, or maybe they have friends who have told them, like, this is the school district you want to be in this town. And they might be specifically looking for that. There was a lawsuit against Weichert Realtors several years ago. They had written in an elementary school in this spot. People had bought a house based on that. It was very important that their child be in that elementary school. There was some reason, I don't remember what it was. And they moved in, they bought the house, they paid the money, they moved in, and then found out that their child would be going to a different school. What did they do? They sued, and they won a lot of money for it because they bought a house that essentially was in a place that wasn't good for them. on the recommendation of the realtor saying that's the school it would go to. So that's why we tend to leave these blank. And if people ask you, give them the simple explanation. You can tell them, well, right now, the kids from this street are going to Washington School, but sometimes schools redistrict. So I'm recommending to you that if that's important, that you call the Board of Education and ask them and let them give you the answer instead of me. All this is to keep you out of lawsuits, which is one of my main jobs. Okay, the next line we come to are items included. And usually it will tell you this in the listing. There are two fields in any listing on the MLS. One is items included and the other is items excluded. And you're going to look at that, and as long as your people agree with all of those things, you can just fill them in exactly the same way they are on the MLS listing. If your people, well, we're not doing the contract. So you need to have a conversation with your sellers, excuse me, where you explain to them for items included, they need to know that anything built in or fixed or attached to the wall, ceiling, or floor technically goes with the house. So they need to understand that, because things like blinds and draperies would automatically usually stay. So if they have a strong attachment to their blinds, they need to put them in the items not included. If they are including something, for example, a refrigerator, some of them are built in, but most of them are movable. Many of them are movable and therefore are considered personal property, just like a chair or a table. So if your sellers want to include the washer dryer, which is also not attached, or a refrigerator, they should put it in the items included, because that could be something that would appeal to a buyer. And by the same token, they should think very carefully if there's anything that they want to be sure to take with them. So in this case, I think this was supposed to say washer dryer, and they wanted their dining room chandelier. So you go over that with your sellers to make sure they understand, because it's amazing. You could have $1 million house and all of a sudden somebody's fighting over the silliest little thing that would cost them a couple $100, but it becomes like the most important thing. And in some cases can even be the end of a transaction. It seems crazy, but I have seen it happen.
Now, Sally, if it's negotiable, if you're willing to perhaps sell it separately, where would you put that?
You could probably put in either of these, certain items negotiable, and maybe attach a list to the listing, or have a list in the house of things they want to sell. But honestly, try to stay away from that. We sell houses, not tables and chairs. And, I would usually advise my sellers that if they have items they want to sell, let's get a contract on your house and then speak to the buyers and ask them if they're interested in purchasing any of those things. It shouldn't be the way you decide if somebody's buying your house or not.
Right, good point.
Hey, Sally?
Yeah.
Those boxes that you fill in information, are those expandable, like automatically, like a Word or Excel document?
No, you have a limited number. So if you realize your people are either including or excluding a whole bunch of stuff that won't fit in here, you're going to say, see attached list and attach it. You can attach documents in the MLS, or you could say, see list in-house and have a list of things on the dining room table or somewhere. Okay, next we come to easements and assessments. So an easement is when someone else is allowed to use a part of the property for some purpose. An example is sometimes the water company might have an easement which enables them to go on to a property if there's a water pipe running underneath someone's property. And the deal is, if there's an easement, that they have to be allowed access. However, if they wreck something, they have to put it back to the original state that it was in. But you do have to disclose if there is such a thing on the property. Assessments are things from the town. I think I gave you an example the other day when we were doing the contract, that let's say the town has decided everybody has to put in a sidewalk in front of their house, and they're assessing a certain amount of money for that to happen. If that's the case, they either need to decide that, hey, we'll just pay that off before the house closes, or they need to put it in here and let the buyer know that they're going to be responsible for it. If the house is also for lease as well as for sale, you're going to put a Y or a yes in here. Sometimes people decide, let's put it up for lease and for sale, and just whichever one happens first is what we'll do. Okay, then showing instructions. This is really important that you have a good discussion with your sellers so that they understand what's going to happen if someone wants to show their house. So there's various options here. There's something called showing time on the MLS, which you can sign up for. But you need to ask your sellers, how do you want this to happen? Do you want people to call me? You can explain showing time to them and see if they would like to do it that way. Once in a while, you get a seller who says, I want people to call me and make the appointment. That's unusual in this day and age, but it can happen. So it's basically, whatever their preference is. Also, sometimes you might write something in here like sellers have newborn baby, no showings between this time and this time. Or maybe you want to put in here, sellers have large dog, please allow 24-hour notice. So there's all kinds of things that you can put in here. It's really according to what your sellers are looking for or any special requests that they have. Then customer remarks, as you can see, this will not appear on a customer report from the MLS, only on the full report that realtors can see. But this is the part that everyone will see, realtors and the customers. And this is customer remarks is really your ad for the house. This is super, super important that you do a good job on the customer remarks. You want to say something here that's going to make the person looking at it think, I want to see that house. And so in doing it, I usually would say to my sellers, what do you think are the biggest selling points of your house? What attracted you to buy this house when you were buying it? And that's often a good place to start. See what they say. Maybe it's important to them that you talk about their awesome backyard with the fabulous pool. Or maybe they think the best thing about their house is that they're very close to the town and the train station, so it's an easy commute. Whatever they say, you should keep that in mind. And you want to say your remarks in a way that attract people. So nothing is worse than looking at a listing that the remarks say, this house is very nice and it has a nice living room and it has 3 bedrooms. I mean, people will be falling asleep by the time they finish reading that. Try to think of something that is what we call a hook, something that's going to make them want to pay attention to this house. Some examples. You are listing a house that has a gorgeous fireplace. Instead of just saying this house has a gorgeous fireplace, we want to paint a picture, because when you can appeal to people's emotions, it makes them act more than simply putting facts. So paint a picture. Imagine sitting by the gorgeous fireplace on a snowy day and being toasty warm or something like that. Or if it's the summer and they have a fantastic pool, you know, imagine the wonderful pool parties you're going to have in your fantastic backyard with pool with built-in jacuzzi. You know, just think of something that is a little enticing to the person. And like I said, paint a picture of what life could be like. Maybe they have a giant dining room, and you can talk about, you know, calling all entertainers. Here's a great place for you to have that fantastic party. Of course, no one's having parties these days, or at least not legally, but eventually we'll get back to that. So that's remarks. Think very carefully about your remarks because they're important. Okay, and then the bottom part of the listing, we're going to again say what the listing date is and the expiration date is. We are again going to tell what the price is. And this part asks us what the possession date is. So the possession date is how soon could a buyer actually close on this house? And the MLS gives you various ranges. So there's a range of 0 to 30 days. There's a range of 31 to 60 days. There's a range of 61 to 90 days. There's a range of 91 to 120 days. So you have to ask your sellers, you know, when would you be willing to vacate this house? And you're going to set up your possession date accordingly.
What if it's contingent on their buying a new home?
Well, you're probably in that case going to say 60 to 90 days. And then in your remarks, back in the customer remarks, one of the things you're going to say is sale in here. Sale is contingent on sellers finding a home, so that people know. And the closing date is always a negotiable item.
Got it.
So keep that in mind. Okay, seller further agrees to pay the broker a compensation of, we're going to put 5% or 6%. And again, you should read all of this language so that you know what it says. This is an important thing. Seller represents that this property is not and will not be exclusively listed with any other broker during the term of this listing agreement. Seller further represents that the property is not and will not be listed for rent during the term of this listing unless mutually agreed upon terms and conditions are negotiated with the broker. Now remember, there was a field up here that allowed you to say that it was also for lease. Okay. And then the next part is just saying your name as the person who's going to be listing it, the name of our company, and you're always going to have this checked. In fact, I think it defaults to this being
Yeah, I
checked.
believe so.
Seller agent and disclose dual agent if the opportunity arises. So you always want to have that checked, because even if someone just shows the house from your office, that is dual agency, and your sellers have to agree to that upfront. This next paragraph talks about what happens if the sad day comes that the entire listing term has been completed and the house has still has not sold, and the listing expires. If the listing expires and it doesn't get relisted, we're writing in here a period. Usually you're going to either write 90 days or 120 days. And it just says, if this listing expires and it doesn't get relisted for a period of 90 days, if anybody who saw the house previously comes along and wants to buy it, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, you're still going to owe me a commission. And that's to protect you that that a seller couldn't meet a buyer and whisper to them on the side, hey, my listing's going to expire. Just wait a couple more days and it'll expire and I'll do the deal with you and you can save money. That's not going to happen, which is why we put 90 days in here. But remember, if it gets relisted by another realtor, then all bets are off. This is not in effect. If somebody who saw it when you were listing it comes along with the new listing agent, the new listing agent's going to get the commission. Okay, down here, these little box places, it's important you understand this. It says authorization is hereby granted by seller to submit this listing to the New Jersey Multiple Listing Service for distribution to all broker members. So that's the whole purpose of this, right? To get it on the MLS. But then it says, unless this box is checked, seller authorizes listing to appear on all real estate websites authorized by the board of directors. So you don't want people to check this box, because if they do, it means that the listing will not be sent to any of the websites. It won't go to Zillow, it won't go to Realtor.com or any of those sites. But if it's left unchecked, it will. And the second box basically says the same thing. Unless this box is checked, the property address will appear on all websites. So if they for some reason don't want their property address to show on a website, they have to check this box. It's very few people check either of these boxes. Okay, so then you as the listing agent are going to sign here, and you're going to have your seller sign. You're going to print the seller's names here. And once you get all of this paperwork done, you're going to send it to me, and I'm going to sign it here. And this has to be done. You must send it to me before you put it on the MLS. So make sure that I see it before it goes on the MLS.
Sally, I'm sorry, is this the document that you would have when you do a listing appointment and you have them sign a contract?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So
Yeah.
what would you do? Just have them sign it and then fill it in afterwards?
No, I would fill it in with them there so that they
Oh.
know. I mean, you can't fill it in afterwards. Otherwise, you could be accused of,
Adding
cheating
something.
them or whatever. They have to know what they're signing.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. Yeah. The only thing that sometimes gets left blank is if somebody says, I want to sign with you. I'm just not exactly sure which date I want to put it on the market. So sometimes the date is left blank, but the one thing you have to understand, if someone signed the listing today, but told you I'm signing it today, but really I don't want the listing to start until January 20th, you do not have a listing until January 20th. Even though you have a signed document, it's not in effect. So always keep that in mind. You really want to get people to sign with you and be ready to go.
Got it.
Okay, so this
Hey,
is,
Sally,
oh, yes.
one other question. Earlier, you said it was possible to go into the MLS and fill things out and then have it uploaded into here.
Yes.
If you did it that way, is there a way to put it on pause so that there's enough time for you to review it?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
because you can say, remember I told you there's a function where you can save it for later.
Okay.
So you could send it to me, and then once I approve it, you could say, now you're ready to put it on. Okay, so this is called the addendum to the listing agreement, and it refers to the commissions. So you're going to fill in your property address and the town, and scroll down here, and again, you're going to write what the buyer agent commission is. So remember, we said it was 2.5% minus 250. So you're going to fill that in there. And then you, as the listing agent, are going to sign. Your sellers are going to sign. And once that's done, I will sign.
Do we need to assign that, Pat?
Yes, you're going to be assigning them. Yep.
I mean, yours.
If you're doing it in dot loop.
No, but the broker manager signature, does that have to be assigned, or is that automatic?
It can. Sometimes people say like anyone can sign, but this is me, admin for Keller Williams Ridgewood.
Okay.
So
that's gotta be
anytime you're assigning to me, a lot of people want to assign it to my name. Don't do that.
Okay.
Assign it to admin, because
So,
I actually have two separate dot loop accounts. One is as Sally Ponchack from when I used to be an agent.
right,
And the other one is admin for Keller Williams, which is my broker.
got it. So if we
Broker
forget to assign it, can you still sign it?
As long as you didn't, let's see if it's on here. If you assign it to no one, I might not be able to sign it.
Okay, got it.
Yeah,
Because if we make any changes, it kind of eliminates all the signatures, correct?
correct. If you go back later and make a change, it will wipe out the signatures. You're
Okay.
exactly right. Yeah, so make sure you get it right the first time.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're ready for our next document. In this case, we're not going to save changes, but if you were doing it, you would be saving changes, of course. Okay. The consumer, some of these say optional next to them. They are not optional. The consumer information statement is a required document. It's required by the state of New Jersey. And you're going to go in and you're going to fill in your sellers' names here, and then your name down at the bottom. And it is auto-filled with Keller Williams Village Square Realty. And it is auto-checked seller's agent and disclosed dual agent if the opportunity arises. If you're sitting with your people, you should be able to have read this and be able to give them a quick synopsis of each paragraph. Okay, so that's the CIS, or the Consumer Information Statement.
So you would take that along with the listing presentation as well?
Absolutely.
All the documents?
Yes. Yep. Because you're hoping you're going to make your presentation and they're going to say, okay, let's go. Always have it with you. Even, sometimes you may come home with it not signed. They might say, we need a week or we need time, but always have it ready and try to get it signed.
Got it.
Okay, the next document that you need is that dual agency one, which again is a required document, even though it says optional next to it. And you're going to fill in your name and then assign these to the sellers. And then you are going to sign as the listing agent. And that's just their further consent to dual agency. You're going to have them sign permission to advertise, because let's say after you list this house, you want to put something on Facebook. Hey, I have this new listing. You want all your friends and relatives to know, hey, I'm a realtor and I'm doing business, and here's a house that I just listed. So you're going to come in and check this as the owners of the property located at, and you'll put their address in. We give Keller Williams permission to advertise our home. And advertise doesn't just mean an ad in the paper, which nobody does anymore anyway. But like I said, even if you put it on Facebook or Instagram, or you tweet about it, any of those sites, that's advertising. So please have them sign this, and they will sign it, you will sign it, and then this is your cell phone number that you fill in there.
And hey, Sally, just wanted to be clear. So if there's there's a husband and wife owning, the property, they can't sign one document. You'd have to send two loops
No,
out.
they can both, no, they can both sign on the same document because you're assigning different signature places.
Oh, okay.
To different people. Yeah, that's why they each have to have their own email in order to use .loop.
Okay.
Because you're assigning to two different people.
And they
Okay.
sign the same document. Okay.
They sign the same document. Yeah. So seller disclosure, this is super important. It is not a required document by the state of New Jersey, but it is a document that we absolutely want you to have your sellers fill out. And it's a series of questions. It's pretty lengthy, but they're easy. It's just check boxes for the most part and a few fill in the blanks. But the seller is tasked with answering these questions honestly. And there's questions that for some people are hard because it might say, one of them is, do you get water in your basement? And if people say to you, oh gosh, I've gotten water a few times, I hate to say it because maybe someone won't want to buy my house. You say to them, you have to say it. You should say it. People will appreciate your honesty. And if you don't say it and the buyers find out later that you knew that your basement got water and you did not disclose it, in New Jersey, that's considered fraud. And fraud comes with a penalty of triple damages, which means a lot of money. So this form is not only does it help the sellers not have liability because they're answering this honestly, hopefully, but it takes away some of your liability because if your sellers said to you, we never have water in the basement, and they sign this and they say, they've never had water in the basement, and the buyers find out they did have water in the basement, you might still be in a little trouble if there was some visible sign in the basement that water had gotten into there at some point, but you wouldn't be in as much trouble because you would have taken the seller's word. The seller lives in the house, and if they were telling you they don't get water, you repeat it, you're simply repeating what the seller said. And that's a tip. Always, if somebody says to you, does this basement get water? Or is the property line over here? You're always going to get in the habit of saying, according to the seller. Don't say it as though you're the voice of authority. You're going to say, get in the practice of saying, according to the seller, the basement does not get water. According to the seller, the property line is over here. That helps you not be the person making the statement.
Sally, I have a question.
Yes.
Will, like, when sometimes there's a sump pump, is that what you call it? Would that go
Yes.
somewhere in that set of documents you just had open?
There is a place, I believe, where they check off if there is a sump pump. Let's just scroll down. Plumbing, water, and sewage.
I only know this because when we recently bought a home, we go down and we see this interesting looking thing, and
Right.
would have to ask, but then sometimes they will tell you, oh, it's dry, and like, as a new buyer, you don't know what that means or anything.
Yeah. So one thing you need to learn if you are showing or listing a house with a sump pump is Some people have a sump pump in their house as a precaution, and they literally have never had water. But most of the time, if there's a sump pump, it means that there was a problem at some time, at some moment. And you need to ask them about that. And maybe they'll say like, well, in Hurricane Sandy, we got water and we wanted to make sure that never happened again. So we got a sump pump and we haven't had water since then. You know, you want to, if you're the listing agent, you want to really understand what's going on. And again, if you're questioned about it, you're going to say, according to the seller, they said they used to get water, but now they don't since they've gotten the sump pump. I'm just trying to see. And the other thing with a sump pump is when do sump pumps usually kick on? When do we get a lot of rain?
Spring?
In a storm,
Oh,
right?
storm.
And
Yeah.
what can happen in a storm? You lose power.
Lose power.
Oh, and then they don't
Sump pumps are electrical. So it's always a good idea if a seller has a sump pump that it have what's called a battery backup. And Harleen, if your house, the sump pump doesn't have a battery backup, think about getting one for the sump pump, because otherwise, you know, you could have a storm and think, oh, good, you know, we're not going to have to worry. We have the sump pump, and your electric goes off.
Right.
The
We
sump pump.
luckily don't have one.
Oh, you don't have one?
No.
Okay.
But we
Okay.
did see homes that had it, and it made my husband very nervous.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they can work perfectly fine. You know, you don't necessarily have to feel nervous if you see one, but obviously, if you don't need one, that is all the better.
Yeah, absolutely. You never know if you're not home.
Yeah.
You don't know what's going on.
Right. Okay, so the next document, oh, did someone else have a question?
I was just saying thank you, Sally.
Oh, okay, you're welcome. Lead paint disclosure. So this, you know, has to be filled out if the house was built before 1978, which is when they outlawed lead paint. And so on this, they're going to fill in the property address. And then you'll notice that there's 3 parts here, A, B, and C. The seller has to initial each one, A, B, C. And then in A and B, they have to check either that they know there's lead paint in their house or they don't know if there's lead paint in their house. And then if they in the next part, it says seller has no reports or records about lead paint, or seller does have the following reports about lead paint if they've, you know, maybe when they bought the house, they had a lead paint assessment done. If they have a report, it has to be disclosed.
What if they've stripped down the home, you know, and they've put up drywall, sheetrock?
What I would say to you is, to any seller, is if the house was built before 1978, unless it was totally gutted and a new foundation put in, they need to fill this out and say that they don't know of any lead paint. And that's typically what the answer is almost always going to be.
Okay.
Seller has no knowledge of lead paint. Even if the house was built before 1978, you know, unless there has been a test of it, they don't know.
Right.
So that's what they're going to be checking off. And then at the bottom, they're going to sign, and you are going to sign. And then once you find buyers for the house, then the purchaser has to sign off on it, as well as the purchaser's realtor, is the buyer agent.
Got it. And that would apply for a rental as well.
Oh yeah, rentals also. Yep. And if the lead paint disclosure does apply, then you're going to make sure that you also send them this, which is a little booklet, an online booklet called Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home. you're supposed to give that to anybody who fills out the lead paint disclosure.
The great thing about that document is that you could email it to them, attach it
It
to.
is, because it's like a little book. So,
Yeah,
you know, if you had to like print it out, it would be not fun.
no.
And then this next form is just a creation by Sally, because sometimes when I look at a loop and I don't see the lead paint form filled out, I don't know, did they just forget to fill out the lead paint form, or it doesn't apply? So I just ask, if you're selling something that was built after 1978, just fill this in with the address and sign it. So I know, okay, I don't have to bother Roddy. There's no.
All their way. It's an honor.
And, okay. The delayed showing form. This is not something that you have to use or necessarily will use, but it is an option for you. And what this is, sometimes people are anxious to get their home on the market. They're anxious for people to know that they want to sell their house, but they're not ready to show it. And the situation could be something like this. They really want to get their house on the market, but they're doing some last minute painting and they don't think the painting will be done for another week. You can put the house on the market today with a delayed showing form filled out that says showings will begin in a week. So you fill in the property address, our office name, your name, the listing date, and then a lot of people have to initial and sign. So you have to initial and sign, I have to initial and sign, and the sellers have to initial and sign. And what it says, it asks you, what is the delay showing period? So in here, you're going to write in, today's what, the 12th. So you would write in January 19th. That would be the start date. And again, you're going to have everybody initial and everybody sign. And something that often happens, and don't stress about it, people seem to love signing in dot loop. And sometimes they get carried away and they just are clicking on everything and signing everything. Half the time I go in and somebody signed in my spot. It's okay, I can work around it. I just, up here, you can add a signature. So I just move a signature down and sign next to the spot where I should be, and it's fine. So don't ever worry about that if you see that your sellers have gone crazy and started signing everything.
That's probably why you should assign it, right?
And then the last thing that you need to have them sign is the wire fraud notice. Now, do you all know what wire fraud is?
Yes.
Yes, Dave, yes?
Yes.
So let me just do a brief explanation of it. So wire fraud occurs when someone basically scams another person into wiring money to them. And what has happened with real estate transactions, and nobody knows exactly how they managed to do this, but these unscrupulous people find out the emails of people involved in a real estate transaction. And I'll give you two concrete examples. The first one we were able to nip in the bud. One of our sellers got an email that they thought was from their attorney because it looked just like their regular attorney's email. And in the email, it requested that they wire money for their closing. This was buyers. Wire money to, it said, to my trust account, except it wasn't really the attorney's trust account. And fortunately, the amount of money looked a little off. So the seller called our listing agent and said, you know, this doesn't quite seem right to me. What do you think? And she said, well, whenever you get a request to wire money, you should always call the person that it says sent you the request. So they called the attorney because the email appeared to be from the attorney and said, just want to ask you about the request for wiring the money. What did the attorney say? I never sent a request to wire money. Somehow these scammers are able to get what looks like the exact same email, except, in the code, they manage to change some little thing that instead of the money going to the person who wrote the email, it goes to them. And I can tell you there has been very little success with getting people's money back if it goes there. I'm going to give you a second example just to show you how seriously this can be, how serious it can be. We had a seller who was selling his house. He had a contract, was going to be closing soon, got an email from what he thought was his current mortgage company saying, okay, your house is about to close. We need you to send us the payoff money for the mortgage. So the person, without checking, went to the bank, wired the money to wherever it said on the email, had the closing of their house. 2 months later, they get a call from they're in their new house now, right? They get a call from the mortgage company from the old house saying, you haven't paid your mortgage, you're in arrears. And they said, what are you talking about? We wired you the money. You sent us a wire request. They said, no, we didn't. And so that was a significant amount of money. It was a couple $100,000 of money that was just gone. So be really, really careful about that. Explain to them that there are these scammers and that the solution to it is anytime you get an email from someone requesting that you wire money, you must call that person and make sure that they really are the one who sent you the money, or who sent you the request, excuse me. So that's super important, and so important that we have our sellers and our landlords sign that they're aware of this so that they don't get scammed. And we also have it in our buyer package when you're doing a contract, because they could also get one of these requests. So those are the documents that have to be signed. And then you also want to make sure that they get the new Attorney General's letter. This is required by the state of New Jersey that you share this. So please make sure that you share that. You can just share it right online. It's easy. Or you can print it out if you need to, if they don't have a computer. And then the other thing I'll just make you aware of, where it says service agreement, sometimes sellers like to put a home warranty on their house so that the buyer can feel like, hey, if they move into the house and something goes wrong, they're covered with an insurance policy. And in this, it explains what's covered. And, you might want to just mention that this is an option. And then the buyer can also add more things onto it if they want to. So it's a good thing to mention to people, and it's a good thing to know about, because sometimes the seller will say, nah, I don't want to do that. But let's say now the home inspection takes place and the home inspector says, I don't know, I think this furnace is at the end of its useful life. You will learn to really hate it when a home inspector says that, because what does that mean? Does it mean it's going to break tomorrow? Not necessarily. Does it mean it's going to break a year from now? Not necessarily. But there is a possibility, because it's old, that it could break. And so at that point, buyers get nervous and say, like, okay, I want a whole new furnace. And the sellers say, no, I'm not doing a whole new furnace. That one is working perfectly fine. So a compromise measure is for the seller to offer the buyer a home warranty, which will say, if it does break in the next, year, you will be partially reimbursed by the warranty company. So just keep that in mind. All right, we have done it. Who has a question? I think you've been asking as we've gone along, but is there anything else anybody wants to ask?
Yeah, earlier there was one of them that was I think it was the CIS that was
Okay.
optional, but it's really not. Is that something that could be changed so that it's really
Unfortunately, Dotloop doesn't let us change it. So it's something you just have to remember. And basically it's easy to remember because every buyer, seller, landlord, tenant that you work with has got to sign it. So just know whoever you work with should be signing that and should be signing the dual agency form, both of those.
Yeah, it sounds like everything on here should be just, given to them.
Yeah.
At least gone over. Yeah.
Right. Right. What they don't need is the wire payment instructions. That's for the closing attorney if they prefer to wire Keller Williams the money from the closing. That you don't share with your seller. But it's in there in case you need it for the attorney.
Yeah, it sounds like it would probably be a good thing, especially with the fraud thing you just spoke about, to at least talk to them about it and say, look, anytime you're going to wire any money anywhere, always call up your attorney or the bank and make sure it's valid.
Whoever supposedly sent it to you and just double check that they really and truly did send it to you. One thing I will say to you is, or recommend to you, is that you consider taking this class again, or that you watch the video of it. But before you do, print out these documents and fill them in as we're going along so that you get the feeling of doing it. Practice this so that when that wonderful day happens that somebody calls you up and says, I'm ready to list my house, you'll be ready to do these documents. Just sitting here and listening to the class doesn't really fully prepare you for it. I really recommend that you sit down and work on filling these papers out so that you really get familiar and that you read them so that you know what the whole document says.
I have a question for you. So let's just say that, you go to a listing presentation, you go through it and everything, they say, let's go. Would you have your computer with this set up?
I would actually have all the documents filled out as best I could in advance.
In Dotloop or
In
printed
Dotloop,
out?
or, if they're older people or someone who doesn't have a computer, I would have them printed out and filled in to some extent.
But you want them to sign it at the conclusion of the meeting, correct?
Yes. Yes.
So I print it out.
Mm-hmm.
Sally, what about the I know, and maybe you went over this, the lead form, I understand, but then there's a pamphlet. Is that something like we should print out as well, or is that something we could carry like in bulk?
You can just share it with them.
Okay.
Unless they're people without a computer, then
Okay.
you're going to have to print it out.
Got it. Okay.
But as I said, it's like a little booklet. So
A lot of pages.
better you can just share it with them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Sally. I've got to run.
Yep. And
Thank you.
thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
I think
Sal.
we're all going to run. And thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you.
For your patience.
Okay. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.